Alisa Divine is the CEO of a publishing company. She's the author of award-winning and best-selling books, and she's also a wife and, probably her most important role, a mum. She's also an advocate for survivors of domestic abuse after having her own experience in an abusive relationship with her ex-husband and father to her children. This relationship lasted for 18 years. In this intimate conversation, Alisa bravely shares her story of that time. Remember, this is her story and her truth. She is now owning her story and, as any good author would, writing the ending the way that she wants to. This is a powerful story for women to hold on to hope for the possibilities of life beyond abuse. When you were 16 years old, in the early 90s, you got into a relationship with the man who would eventually become your husband and also the father to your 5 children. You say that from the beginning that there were red flags. Can you share with me what they were?
Yes. In the beginning, before we even started dating, he had a girlfriend. And that was the first red flag because he ended up breaking up with the girlfriend to then start dating me. And that was probably a clue that he would also cheat on me
Mm-hmm.
in the future. And in the beginning too, it kind of felt like a love story, a teenage romance,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt very exciting. And I could also tell there were moments that did not feel right. And at the time, I didn't recognize them for what they were.
Mm-hmm.
For example, little pieces of jealousy, of not wanting me to talk with other guys or have friends that were guys. Also, not wanting me to wear certain clothes or questioning me if I would wear something. And it, though all of those things would come back in bigger ways
Mm-hmm.
the longer that our relationship continued. And for example, the jealousy piece, one time he found a note that I had in my pocket from school, a class that I was in, and a male friend had given me this note. I don't even remember what it said, but it felt very innocent. And he wanted to drive me over to the mall where this guy worked and watched me as I walked in there, and I had instructions to tell him not to talk to me again and that I couldn't be friends with him. So, those little pieces of control, of jealousy, of domination can appear very early in the relationships. And it's hard to distinguish, is this something that's cute?
Mm-hmm.
Does he really love me that much that he doesn't want anyone else to talk to me, that, he only wants us to be together and not anyone else? Or is this something that is a red flag? And at the time, in the early 90s, we didn't have education on that. We didn't talk about what healthy relationships were or what domestic abusive relationships were, for that matter. I mean, we didn't even have that conversation, about our parents or or any kind of education around that. So it was really hard to decipher.
That's really interesting that you say that about not having that awareness, because it's not an education that's given to you. And it sort of harks back to that saying that some people use nowadays when they say, oh, the good old days. And you think, was it the good old days when it was shrouded in secrecy, stuff like that? When I suppose at that age and at that time, you didn't even have the language for abuse.
Oh, definitely not. In, the good old days, I mean, maybe they were simpler in some ways. We didn't have the technology, we didn't have the social media. I mean, I can't imagine being in an abusive relationship with all of that. I mean, right now, I've seen multiple times on TikTok, if, that there is a man who appears to be cheating, someone will make a video of it and they will post it. And, within a day or so, the wife or the girlfriend is found. She's tagged in it. It's just not acceptable anymore. And it's very easily visible, and back then it was hidden. It was hidden.
When did or how early on into the relationship did the cheating start?
Very early, very early. And, there was always an excuse. There were often tears. There was an I'm sorry, I love you. It wasn't like it was a blatant disrespect. And in a way, I felt sorry for him. I felt like I needed to help him. I felt a duty to help him. And he always seemed like, he wanted to be better. And that was a piece that really kept me there for a long time.
You then got married to him when you were 21 years old. And at that time, you also had a 2-year-old daughter together. Was being a family and hopes of that perfect family white picket fence idea, was that also a part of a reason to stay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's because I think I lacked some of that in a way, because my parents got divorced when I was 10. And that was hard on me. And I really craved having a family. So much so that I think I know that I made it even more important than developing myself. And at that age, that's both women and men, that's their responsibility at that age, is to develop themselves and to grow and to learn and to find out who they are and to have experiences, to travel, to try new things, And I didn't do that. I thought that my identity was within creating a family. And I absolutely love my children and love my family. And, I am so grateful for them. And I've learned lessons along the way. I was able to develop myself at an older age, to do all of those things, to have all of those experiences. I kind of flip flopped, the order. And it definitely is something, that I can teach on and educate and help others to see, because it does prevent being in a relationship that can cause turmoil and wreak a lot of havoc and stress in your life.
Because I think when you believe someone that much about them changing, and because you want it to work, you want the ideal, you want them to be the best they can be because you love them. You want you want to make it work and you feel that responsibility. I suppose in that way is why you keep believing it every time that he says, I'll change, I'll do better.
That's correct. And it's interesting because the first time that I filed for divorce, I was 22. So, or 23. We had only been married for a year and I filed for divorce.
In terms of his anger showing up, did that show up in different ways emotionally, physically, verbally? How did that show up within the house for you?
Yes, it was the majority of it was emotional, verbal. There were times of physical abuse, especially at a wedding that I was participating in, one of my good friends, and it was out of town. And we had quite an event at the wedding because afterwards, when we were in the hotel, he attacked me. And I escaped the hotel room and ran to some of my friends who hid me in another room. And he continued for the whole night to knock on hotel room doors to try to find me. How the police were never called, I don't know. But that was quite a traumatic event for everyone involved. And it's times like that that we're outside of the home that I think as a society, we don't realize how much domestic abuse is not only between the two people who are in the relationship. It's it's everyone around them who was involved. And to this day, which is 16, 17 years later, it's still talked about among the people who were there because it affected everyone.
How differently did he present himself to other family members outside of the house and friends? If I were to have met him on the street or been a colleague of his, how different would he present himself to me than inside your home?
Oh, he would have been very charming, very likable, very much a conversationalist. And, at the time, there were some close friends who saw through it. It was like there was so much, only so much that he could do that way before it would spill over into the part where he couldn't control it anymore. Meaning, some of my friends saw some of the outbursts, some of the controlling. Like even my parents will look back on it now and say, we saw this, we didn't realize it at the time because most of it is a pattern, and sometimes it takes people a long time to figure out the pattern.
Which in turn leaves it even more difficult for you because if you leave, the sort of rhetoric in your head is, if I leave, who's going to believe that happened because of how he presents himself so differently? They'll believe him over me.
Definitely, that was one of my main concerns when I did file for divorce and I left. And the way that I got through that was with therapy and realizing that it didn't matter what anyone else thought. I had my experiences, and that was my determining factor.
Did your children see what was happening inside the home?
Yes. Yes. There were times that were hidden for sure, things that I kept from them purposefully. And then there were also times that things exploded in front of them as well.
Mm-hmm. Which, as a mother, you want, it adds that extra layer because all you want to do is protect them from it.
Definitely. And I thought that that's what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I thought my role was to keep the family together and to keep the peace.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I learned that by staying, I could actually be creating more harm for my children
Mm-hmm.
because they could begin to normalize that behavior
Mm.
and either create it themselves, recreate it themselves, or, be susceptible to that.
Mm.
And that really was my breaking point, when I learned that, because I thought it was the best thing for us to stay together.
I want to ask you a question, but I have to be very, very, very careful with the tone that I use. And I want you to understand why, first of all, I'm asking it. Because it's a question that I think shouldn't be asked when it comes to domestic abuse. But the reason why I'm asking it is because I want to know what that tape was in your mind and your rationale. The way I don't like it being asked is, why didn't you just leave? Why did you put up with it? Why did you accept the cheating? But I'm asking it to truly understand what was going on in your head to stay for the 13 years. How did you justify it to yourself? What was that tape?
I'm glad that you asked this because it is an important question that we want to begin to flip the script on,
Mm-hmm.
because I really believe that we should be asking the people who are abusive, why did you continue to be abusive?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than put all of the blame on the women for staying. And I completely understand, we want to begin to have more conversations around this so that we can identify, where the responsibilities lie
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And for me, the responsibility was in protecting my family.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wanted a family more than anything. And this goes back to, the question earlier, where, I mentioned that I kind of flip flopped my own development into first, I focused on having a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was important for me that my children had their mom and dad together because I thought that that was the best for their own development. And I thought it would be very hard for them if we divorced. And I also, I held that dream for myself, like you mentioned, of the white picket fence. We had money, we had the house, we had a lot of the pieces in place that society would say are successful for a
Mm-hmm.
family,
Mm-hmm.
and I also wanted to believe him that he was going to change.
It was that hope that you held on to right from the beginning, right from the first red flags. It was that hope, wasn't it?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. What was the turning point for you? Where did you find the strength to make the decision to file for divorce for the last time?
It was after therapy, after going to therapy for a while, and it was a back and forth. I started going to therapy and then I stopped because I thought, no, I'm going to work on this. We're going to figure this out. I went back to therapy, got stronger, filed for divorce, or filled out the paperwork rather, changed my mind again.
Mm-hmm.
Was a lot of back and forth, it's the growing process.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was when I learned that staying in an abusive relationship could be more harmful to my kids than leaving.
What?
And that was my breaking point. And so then I worked on getting strong enough to be able to go through the action steps of that. And one of the other pieces that I did was not tell anyone on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
meaning I did not share it with friends, I did not share it with family. So this time, what my therapist helped me to do was to be able to get so strong within myself that by the time I did tell people, and by the time he was served and it, other people became aware of it, I was so strong in myself that it didn't matter if anyone tried to talk me out of it.
Mm-hmm. You say that in your healing process, there was immense shame and embarrassment around it. Why was that?
Well, I think I also, shed a light on it that in the entirety it wasn't honest. Like I didn't share the abusive parts with other people because I was embarrassed, because I thought maybe some of it was my fault, because it was embarrassing for me to be with someone who hurt me,
Mm-hmm.
and it was shameful that maybe at that time, I questioned, did I allow this to happen? Did I cause some of this to happen? I really internalized so much of it and put so much of it on myself.
Taking the responsibility for what happened. Again, that mindset of I'm not good enough, so there's something at fault here. The fault must be on me, and the change needs to come from me.
Absolutely. And feeling not good enough was a very, very big part of it,
Mm-hmm.
because maybe if I was a little bit better, he wouldn't have acted the way that he did.
Mm-hmm. The healing journey that we talk about, and you alluded to it earlier, that sometimes we think that big events will be the magic wand, and sometimes in your case, maybe the divorce will happen and everything will be fine after that. Maybe I'll go to therapy and everything will be fine after that. Life, unfortunately, doesn't work like that, and it takes a lot of work thereafter. How hard was the healing process for you, and what did that look like?
I wish that I could say it was easy
Mm-hmm.
and it was simple, but it wasn't. Because not only did I heal, I went on to break many cycles and to make it my livelihood that it is today. And so I went really far with it. And a lot of times my healing journey was very alone, was very private, was very much a back and forth, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward. And I wouldn't have done it any other way, I don't think, because it has allowed me to be where I am today. And I have to say, like on the other side, like my life is so full right now. I'm married to a man who respects me and loves me, and we have fun together. I'm valued. We share a family with 8 children. We travel a lot. I have work that's very fulfilling, getting to help women write and share their stories. You know, that is that's where it's at, when you can really take the time to heal, to break patterns, to do it in a way that honors yourself and all of the experiences that you've been through. Like I really can't think of anything that's more rewarding than that.
And it's interesting because when you're stuck in that cycle or feel that you're stuck in that cycle and you feel that you can't get out, it's a part of it, it's the fear of living without him, the fear of living alone or living with your children. I couldn't do this without him. But actually, listening to you, you've thrived without him. You've saved yourself, you've saved your children. You've actually made the perfect family without him.
I did. And it's interesting because I was very fearful. And he even told me, who do you think's going to want you? You've had 5 kids. It was a fear of mine. And those were the times where it was like just 1 foot forward, 1 foot in front of the other, keep moving, and it does get better. I always looked for the helpers. I always looked for the people who could teach me, who were doing things that I wanted to do. I always, I remember very like early on when I heard a podcast about a woman, and I don't even remember what she had built, but I remember what she said, and I remember the feeling that I got. And she said to build something bigger than the pain you went through. And so for me, that was always something that a vision that I held. I was going to build something bigger than the pain that I went through. And it took me a lot longer than I thought. And it was harder than I thought. But I am on the other side of that with something that I've built and am continuing to build that feels so much bigger than all of the pain that I went through.
The hope got you through the years with him, and it seems that hope is now something that's very prevalent in your life, and it's helped you also in your healing journey. What does hope mean to you, and how important was that in your life and is today?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, hope has always been the way that I have gotten through. And I've, in the last few years, even taken it to another level where I've had the hope, I've had the vision, but I'm taking it a step further because I'm turning that hope into reality. I'm taking action on the hope to be able to create and build.
I want to ask you something again, which again, I feel like I need to outline my intentions for this question. And my intentions are for anyone who's listening who is going through it at the moment and have got children in the situation. It's interesting what your perspective from earlier is that if you, what you thought would break up the family by leaving was actually the very thing that brought the family together. Once you find that to be the truth, and once you get that to that point, now what you're doing is you're speaking out about your story, which, as we know, takes a huge amount of healing. It takes courage, it takes bravery. But by sharing your story, and I'm not putting emphasis on him at all here, he's the father of your children. And there's maybe someone listening who thinks, I couldn't share my story because I wouldn't want to put it out there about my children's father. Or there might be legal ramifications. It's still living with that fear of him. How have you learnt to reach a place where you considered your children and now helping other people by sharing your story and not scared of him?
Oh, I love this conversation and where this is going. This is so important. So thank you for asking this. It's definitely been a one step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing for me from the beginning was to be in integrity and to also share my truth. So I can share my story and my experiences from how it has affected me. And that is where I put my focus on,
Mm-hmm.
and if he wants to share his story, he can in
Mm-hmm.
his way,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, I think with respect to my children, that it has been a challenging piece because, they are older now. They understand my books. I was also featured in a documentary
Mm-hmm.
on the effects of domestic violence on children. They don't always like that I share this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do it from my perspective. I do it from what I've learned, from the ways that it affected me as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
from the ways that I've healed in the education that I've developed, the books that I've written. I do it from the perspective of what we need to change in our society. As much as possible, I take the focus off of him and put it on how this has affected me and how I've grown and learned. And for me, that's being in integrity. It's not pointing fingers, it's
Mm-hmm.
looking at the behaviors, at the solutions, and the actions. So, not focused on the person as much as the behaviors and the solutions.
Mm. That's such a great answer. And thank you for understanding why I asked that as well. And
It's such an important conversation because
mm-hmm.
that's very valid. It's very valid for women to be fearful
Mm-hmm.
and to feel like their voice is shut down and to worry what their children will say. So, for me, it goes back to being in integrity. It goes back to writing your story and sharing your story as a healing modality and doing it for yourself, you know, and even having conversations with your children if that comes up, you know, as a point for them.
And it's about the intention of doing it as well. If your intention for sharing your story, if the intention is to hurt or to hurt him or to seek revenge or out of a place of anger, then more healing work might be needed. But if the intention is, like you say, as a healing element to yourself whilst helping other people as well, well, then that's the platform. And as long as your intentions are right, that's the main thing as well.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, if there is still the anger and they're wanting to retaliate and take it out, you know, there is more work around that to do. I really want to express that possibility for people everywhere to be able to write their story in a way that they want it to end, you know, and then actually live that out.
And in that journey, have you now reached a place to look at what happened to you and to fully understand that none of it was your fault?
Yes. Yes. I recognize that none of it was my fault. And I also take responsibility for building my own self-worth, my own self-love and confidence. And I've turned that into education to help other women do the same. Because I do think that it is our individual responsibilities to be able to build ourselves up in a way that we recognize when something is unhealthy, when a relationship around us is unhealthy.
I'll end on this. What do you hope your children have learned from you by leaving their father?
I hope they learn to stand up for themselves. I hope they learn to follow their own path, their own truths. I hope that they learn to be brave and go after what they want, to develop boundaries, to learn healthy relationships, to have fulfilling lives in all the ways that are important to them. And I hope that they learn that I have always loved them and that I've always intended to do this for them. And I never meant for it to be hurtful to anyone, always for the greater good of our family and for the people that we come across.